Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My respected friends, on behalf of the Nanaimo Arts Council, I wish to thank you all for joining us. Haitsepka Quansalas Kakip Atanaquail. I would particularly like to acknowledge the Snuneymuxw First Nation on whose traditional territory this event is taking place. We give our highest gratitude and appreciation to the people of Snuneymuxw for allowing us on their territory. Siet alata Snuneymuxw Mustimuxw ni hakwishis tantamnach atanaquail. It is my honor to first introduce respected Snuneymuxw elder Geraldine Manson to say a few words of welcome. Ms. Manson is an elder in residence and a traditional knowledge advisor at Vancouver Island University. Please join me in welcoming Geraldine Manson.
Thank you, Sean. RCMCIS, CM Sultan, CM Mistimos. Antapat Tasia, Senemo, each to ease all. Haitsepaquant olive sakip, anaquail. It is with great honor that I stand and sit before you, welcoming you that are coming together to be part of this beautiful event this evening. And here on the traditional territory of Senemo, honoring those who are going to be speaking and responding to questions or whatever they're here to correspond with. I welcome each and every one of you from wherever you may be listening online within your area, but honored to be part of the showcasing of three artists, Marianne and Carly, and of course our I shouldn't say beautiful, our handsome young man, Elliot Whitehill. Kula, Sultan. I am honored here to welcome them to begin the session this evening. Haitseabka.
On behalf of us all, I extend thanks to Geraldine Manson for your kind words of welcome. My name is Sean Gallagher, and I am board president of the Nanaimo Arts Council. Miles Hayes, our communications and operations coordinator, is at the Zoom controls tonight for this presentation. In response to the pandemic, the Nanaimo Arts Council created 3 online galleries, and today we're marking the inaugural exhibition in the 3rd of these galleries, which is the Moon Jelly Gallery. This gallery will host an ongoing series of curated exhibitions. The 3 emerging artists in this show were selected by an emerging curator, Madeleine Claire Benson. Madeleine Claire Benson is an arts professional, writer, and curator from the West Coast of Canada. She is currently based on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw, Snuneymuxw, and Stuminas First Nations, also known as Nanaimo. She holds a Master's in Arts in Art History, Theory, and Criticism from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and a Bachelor of Arts with honors in Art History and Philosophy from the University of Toronto. She has published with the University of Cambridge and the University of Minnesota Press. Benson has presented her research at conferences around the US and in the UK. Her research and work concerns the legacies of settler colonialism, land-based practices, and environmentalism. She was the project coordinator and curator for Art at YXT, an exhibition program at the Northwest Regional Airport, Terrace Kitimat, programming manager for Capture Photography Festival in Vancouver, and organizer of the Skeena Salmon Art Show in Terrace, Hazelton, and Smithers, BC. Benson was vice president for the Abbotsford Arts Council Board of Directors and a participating curator in the Shanghai Curators Lab residency in Shanghai, China. Benson is beginning a PhD in visual studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz in the fall of 2021. Please welcome Madeleine Claire Benson.
Thanks so much, Sean. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I want to say a big thank you to the folks over at Nanaimo Arts Council, especially Sean and Miles, for the work they are doing in supporting a broad spectrum of the arts in Nanaimo. Sean's willingness to support my creative vision has been a delight, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today. I also want to express my gratitude to the artists presenting their work in this show. They all truly inspire me, and I hope you make your way over to the online exhibition in the Moon Jelly Gallery to spend some time learning about their work. I'm also very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Marianne Mulkan, who is a Canadian visual artist living and practicing on Vancouver Island. She holds a Bachelor of Arts with distinction from Vancouver Island University here in Nanaimo. Majoring in visual arts, print media became a strong focus as she developed her practice. Her work embraces an exploration of the intersection between the natural world and human values. Her Estuary Series, presented in the exhibition, are the result of a sustained relationship with place, traveling for several years to the Kluxu River estuary, where salt and freshwater connect in a constantly changing ecosystem. Minoring in psychology, she is intrigued by the affiliation we have with our unconscious and how that relates to the physical world. Hours of quiet reflection spent in nature inspires and informs her work. Mulkan has exhibited across Western Canada, and her work is in both private and public collections. Recent awards include the Center for Contemporary Printmaking, Print Day in May Award, the Visual Arts Award of Excellence, the E.J. Hughes Memorial Award in Visual Arts, and the Ladysmith Arts Council Fine Art Show's Best Printmaking Award. Her work is also featured in the Vancouver Island University's Library Digital, Intellectual, and Creative Archive. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Marianne.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I respectfully acknowledge that I live, work, and practice on the ancestral lands of the Nanaimo people. It is an honor to participate in this exhibition alongside Carly and Elliot. And I would like to thank Madeline, our curator, and the Nanaimo Arts Council for sponsoring this event. Tonight, I thought I would speak about my Estuary Series and give you some insights into my thoughts and my processes. There we are. And because the Estuary Series really formed the roots and foundation of my overall printmaking practice. And the story begins in Kluxu, and you can see the little spit of land here. The ocean is on one side and the river's on the other side. Now this is the Riverside at sunset. I wanted to show you some of the beauty of the place so you could get a sense of what that's like. This is a place where the fresh water and the salt water meet. You can see the tide is in, and these cycles and support systems really are a sanctuary for the inhabitants, including myself when I'm there. The artworks in this series reflect my engagement with the water and the surrounding fauna. And I like to share how I feel when I'm there, the sense of awe I feel, and the sense of wonder and reverence I feel for when I'm there. Next slide. Mind Over Water is the very beginning of my of this series. I started it on my picnic table. The bottom photo there is kind of the view from my picnic table, and you can see it's foggy. And as I carved my block as on the picnic table, I became transfixed by the changing colors in the water. And I brought that block home to the studio, and you can see the first layer in a slide above. And that's the very first layer, and it just captures these raw mark-making attributes that I carved onto the block at that time. So it really inspired the whole series. I was just playing, and then all of a sudden I was making a whole bunch more work. Next slide. Fern Dance is really about the wind and how it ripples through the forest floor. There are lots of trails in the area of Estuary, and I venture onto them. And so I wanted to capture a sense of movement in this piece. And so what I did is, this is about 6 layers, and there's about 4 or 5 different colors of green, and then there's the yellow and the orange, but it's the different colors of green that I was hoping to create a sense of movement with this piece. And so that's what I was trying to capture. Next slide. Now, fluid space really comes right out of my imagination and my thought processes while I'm there. What I wanted to show you is some of the under layers of the piece. I often will mix colors on my brayer and to create this chromatic intensity. And so what I was thinking about with this piece is, I was thinking about, I'm surrounded by water. I have the ocean on one side, the river on one side. Human beings themselves are made of water. And so I was trying to lose my sense of self and place. So what this is I aim to capture the rhythmic qualities of shape and form as a chromatically intense form of identity. And the bright colors reflect the energy and abundance of life within the water as my sense of self disappeared. Next slide. Time gap reflects my relationship with time when I'm at Estuary. Time for me seems to stop, and it doesn't correspond to physical reality. So the white arrow in the middle of that block represents the present moment for me. It is that place where there's no past, no future. And the little traces of ink that comes across that white bit are the traces of future ideas, perhaps, and thoughts, past thoughts that are always trying to grab my attention and pull me out of the present moment. I wanted to also show you my press. That's the size of the press. It'll take a full sheet of 22 by 30 paper if I want. So it's a fairly big press. And this is a picture of a time gap on the press. Next slide. Here's an example of the ink on my brayer. I like to warm up the ink on a glass surface to make it nice and smooth, and put a smooth layer on the lino block itself. So there's an example of an inked up lino block after I've put the ink on it. What continuum is for me is it represents the underlying tensions of the water and the tidal forces, which are connected to the gravitational energy of the sun, of the moon, of the earth. And it's those rhythms and the changing tides that really tether me when I'm there with their constancy. Next slide. Now, Still Point is another forest piece, and it's really about being in the forest, and the forest is quite dark in the fog. And then there's a point where the sun, just around noontime, the sun comes through and it just bursts through the fog and creates a chromatic intensity of light and rhythm. And I tried to capture that in a lino block. And that's a challenge all in itself. It was a fun process, and it really captures the way I work. I work as far as I'll create a layer, and then I will respond to each layer as I work. I don't plan out the entire print. It's more of an intuitive printmaking practice, which is a little bit unusual, but it's how I work. And this is a good example of that. Next slide. And Estuary is also part of the Estuary series, and it's really about birds and the lightness of their qualities. And again, I created color merges in the center. You'll see it's a little bit lighter There's a fuchsia color and then a violet color over top. And I just wanted to capture their lively lightness with this piece. It's just a very simple piece. Next slide. Now, Viscitude is the very last print I created in this series, and I'm always enamored with the fact that new life seems to grow out of what appears to be dead. And so that's really what this print is about. It's there's the estuarine ecosystems are dependent on the dead growth for nutrients for the fish and the animals of the region. So what this print does is it kind of captures that in a way. It's tied to Fern Dance in the fact that Fern Dance is lively and dancing, and this print is the skeleton of the fern with the new life growing from it. And as I made this piece, I really started to question our own human interaction and unsustainable practices as I was thinking about how much we don't know about how dependent systems are on each other. Next slide. So here I am finishing it off, and I finished this off on Print Day in May in 2020. And what Print Day in May is, it's an international celebration of printmaking throughout the world. And printmakers who are involved will pull a print on that day and post it on social media. So this was my contribution for Print Day in May of 2020. I just wanted to share that little sneak peek of that. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the Estuary Series formed the roots of the next couple of series that I've worked on. And this is a light series. When I was in an undergraduate degree at university, I was lucky enough to attend the International Positive Psychology Conference. And I listened to lectures about resiliency and hope. And positive psychology is really the study of what's right in life. So when COVID hit Canadians, I started working with the light spectrum to create a sense of hope, or that was my hope, to create a sense of hope. And so this is called Chromatic Aberration. It's I use light metaphorically because white light will break out into a chromatic abundance of color. And that's what I tried to capture here. So these are an example of a 9-layer addition. There is the first 3 layers, followed by the second 3 layers, followed by the last 3 layers. Next slide. Now, Winter Light and Robin Song are both from that series. And Winter Light is really about the sun, how it's always in the sky. It rises and it sets with constancy, and it forms that sense of hope. And Robin Song's about sound and the color of sound and the magic of that. So I just wanted to share a couple of pieces from my light series. Next slide. And this is the Introspective Series. Everybody was moving into summer with COVID, and I was turning inward, spending lots of time alone. So that inspired the Introspective Series. And this, I started playing with the square foot format, the 12 by 12 inch format, which I really enjoy because for me, it creates a footprint. It's a square foot, so it becomes my footprint in the world. So this is, I was elevating a snail that I almost stepped on. And so that's what this intersection of line and color created. And I was playing with perception a little bit by placing it on white paper and then on black paper, and how the spiral changes when you do that. So playing with perspective and positive and negative space. So that's when I started doing that. Next slide. And again, this is a square foot format, part of the Introspective Series, and it really is about the turning inwards. That's what full turn is about for me. It's about that inner light that we all have. And then plexus is about that inner light of a dandelion gone to seed, and how much life there is still left in the plant when that happens. Next slide. And I put this heart light in there so you can see a little bit about how I interpret what I see. This is a good example of that. You can see the raindrops, the refraction of light coming through the leaf, and also the leaf veins in this print. So it's a good example of how I interpret what I see, and in color and shape and form and line. Next slide. And this is the series I'm currently working on, right back to Viscitude. It's on a whole idea of renewal, death, rebirth, and I'm still working through some of my thoughts on this, but it's that underlying energy that we don't often see that transpires to new life. And that's what I'm working on right now. So it's something I wanted to share with you all. Next slide. There you go. I just wanted to leave you, this is kind of the concept I'm working on with the renewal series. You cannot step twice into the same river, for other waters are ever flowing onto you. And that's a very old quote from Heraclitus. I think that's how you say it. Anyway, thank you so much for having me today. And I appreciate being here and sharing a little bit about my practice.
Thanks so much, Marianne. It was great to see the different formats that you're working on too, and which leads us right into our first question we received through Facebook. And they were the person who asked the question noticed that they were surprised by the size of your works. The presence of them, I guess they seem so much larger than they are physically. So I was wondering if you could talk about the choice of size for your works and maybe how the format changes the final work.
Okay, well, when I think about, I already mentioned that I like that square foot, the 12 by 12. It's a square format, so there's compositional challenges in a square, and I like a good challenge. And so I appreciate that. And I like the idea of a footprint and transpiring by the square foot. I can work much bigger, and I'm going to work up to that as I move forward with my practice. The other thing that I think about when I decide on a size is a lot of people like to frame print. So once you frame that 12 by 12 print, it actually ends up being about at least 20 by 20. It actually ends up being taking quite a bit of wall space. So I also think about that when I'm making my choice.
Great, thanks. We have another question from someone who tuned into your CBC interview today. And they said, you spoke about belonging to a printmaking community where everyone makes a print on the same day, which you referred to in your presentation, of course. And do you see modern technology changing the traditionally lonely practice of visual artists?
Well, for me, art's always about community. When I was at university, being part of that artistic community is such a huge positive thing. And after university, being part of different groups are equally important. I belong to a contemporary art talk group. I belong to a group of artists called Amicitia. And I also when I first finished university and I was working on the Estuary Series, I belonged to a critique group where we all met at St. Joseph's School. So artists find ways to meet regardless. And I think online just amplifies that. And yes, in answer to the question, yes, I see it changing. I see there's so many great things online and so many great initiatives that are happening for artists right now.
Thanks, Marianne. What a sense of hope you've given us all for some connection during these trying times. Appreciate that. One last question I'll ask you. So what's inspiring you lately? You're working on your renewal series. How do you, when you're out in nature, what jumps out to you, or how do you look deeply to find something to inspire you?
I like to be in the moment. And by doing that, I'm very observant, and I'll observe things that, you know, I may have walked by 100 times before, and then all of a sudden there it is. And that's big for me, because that means to me that, oh, I take photos with my phone when I'm out, and I will draw, I will sketch, and I will journal. I do all of those things. And then I come back and I think about ideas and I just start working. To me, being in the studio is about working, and things just come out of me. And that's really how I work, intuitively in that way.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm excited now to introduce our next speaker, Carlena Bess, who is a Métis multimedia artist with a background in anthropology and social work based in Terrace, BC. She has a BA in anthropology from the University of Northern British Columbia, a social service worker diploma from the Northwest Community College, and a certificate in visual arts from the Vancouver Island School of Arts. Her work integrates her diverse cultural background and a multitude of mediums, from paint to beads and wood burning to ink. Nebess's paternal Métis lineage includes her father, Gayton Bess, a Métis carver. Nebess's grandmother, Olive Nebess, nee O'Neill, was born in Pas, Manitoba in 1935 to her great-grandparents, Rose de la Ronde from Skoman, Manitoba, Treaty 2 territory, and Elvin O'Neill. Nebess's grandfather, Andy, was also born in the Pas to parents William, Bill, and Elizabeth Nebess nee Campbell. Nebess's practice melds innovative techniques such as ink and watercolor with beadwork, honoring the Métis legacy of being known as the flower beadwork people. Her beaded landscape series presented in the exhibition is truly created out of a labor of love. Thank you for speaking with us today, Carly.
Miigwech, Madeline. Tansay, everyone. Bon Matan. Good evening. Carly Dishnakashan. My name is Carly. I just want to say Miigwech to Elder Geraldine for starting us off in a good way. I'm honored to be here on the traditional territory of the Tsimshian Nation, specifically Kitsim-Kalim and Kitsilis First Nations. I'm honored to be sharing alongside Marianne and Elliot. And I thank the Nanaimo Art Council for inviting me here today. So what I'm going to be showing you today is some of my pieces from my first solo art show, Beaded Landscapes, that was in the Terrace Art Gallery in November 2020. And I just want to start off by saying thank you again to Madeline for introducing my lineage. It's important to do this as a Michif person because it roots me in my community and my identity. And it's important for me to always work in a good way, honoring my family and my community, because that's where a lot of my work comes from, is that connection to them and the land. I'll get you to switch the slide, please. So this is my first piece that I want to talk about. This is called Delicious, and this is a wild asparagus, one of my favorite foods to harvest in the spring. And I've actually harvested some this year. So part of my art practice is going out on the land, harvesting, processing, taking photos, just creating an intimate relationship with the landscape and the plants. And this photograph I had taken was from Groundhog Lake near Wells, BC, or Barkerville. And part of my practice as well is integrating Métis beadwork into a contemporary context, which is my watercolor pieces, and melding them together, much like I do my identity. I think about my identity like I think about my art, coming from sometimes two different walks of life, two different perspectives coming together to make one cohesive thing, one cohesive person. Next slide. This piece is called Longing. This piece was done. I was starting to think about how I wanted to introduce my family into the show and introduce concepts of longing for a landscape that I've never been to, but having a sense of nostalgia for a place that I've only heard in stories or seen in pictures, and many stories from my uncles and grandparents about the Paw, about Lake Cormorant, where my grandfather and his brothers had trap lines all the way around the lake. I still have family there and places that I want to be. And I feel like in order to situate my family, I needed to have a visual representation of where those stories come from and that those places that I long to see, but I'll never quite get those images out of my mind, and those people might not be there with me alongside me because my grandparents have passed, so I might be able to visit those places, but those stories are gonna live on in the memories of their voices. And as I was thinking about that, I just thought about those rivers and those lakes and how there is that border of Manitoba, but how our ancestors and the Métis voyageurs took those like those waterways as roads, and how those branched out. And I thought about our Métis beadwork and how it's branched out and traveled across the landscapes, and you can see those light designs in there of some of the beadwork patterns and our historic beadwork patterns. And then in the close-ups, you'll see some of those special places from my grandparents' stories and where some of my family still lives. The Paw and Lake Cormorant are beaded onto that landscape through the watercolor paper. Next slide. This was a really special piece for me to bead. This is for my grandma, Olive Cookham. I think about the love that I have for my family and my grandma, and the love that I have for berry picking is because of her. We used to go out behind her house in the trailer park with her long-eared dog Lucy and pick different berries and fill up her freezer, and we would call it pie security for the winter. And this is something that I still tried to do even after she stopped taking those walks and picking those berries. So as I was beading this, I remember stories that she told me while we were in the woods of crows chasing her, and some of those black pieces are some of those darker parts of those stories seeping into that river. And the river motif is always something that comes into my work as well, as you saw in the last piece, is because I always think of how my identity feels like different rivers coming together to create this like rushing storm of a person from all these different backgrounds and cultural contexts and blood memories to create this, just this intense river as I think of it. And next slide. This is one of my favorite hikes in Terrace. And this is on Bornite Mountain. And when I think about this piece, I really think about my healing journey and how art has been met with some trauma. I won't get into it because I don't want to put any trigger warnings into this presentation, but much like the landscape and plants have been medicine, art has also been medicine. And I hear a lot of beaders talk about this, and I know this firsthand, is beading is medicine. Beading is the way that we connect with ourselves, our identity. It's a way that we practice being in community, beading with each other. And I think it's such a healthy relationship to have, understanding those plants in a way that you can render them and create beauty with them to share with other people. And then also understanding us as flower beadwork people through our grandmother's old beadwork is really important. And a lot of my work is an exploration of both that past grandmother's beadwork and then also healing and a medicine journey for myself. Next slide. Okay, Chimigwich, thank you everyone. Marcy.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Carly. I'm just wondering if you are willing and able to talk a little bit about how the making of these works affect you. I was particularly touched by your description of memory and longing and kukum, and I'm wondering if it's an emotionally tolling process creating them.
A lot of the times, more of the reflection piece on them. I'll be very candid. That's all I can be usually. Doing the write-ups for them, people will see that when they visit the exhibition online, was a lot more impactful for me than actually creating the piece, because I find when you get into that flow, or as I call it, that medicine of creating, I find that I'm swept away, and it's more of an energetic exchange and a celebration. And then the reflecting on the meaning of the piece and even the thought before creating the piece, I find can be very emotional. But also it's like a beautiful emotion, but sometimes it can be a little bit hard.
That's really lovely. Thank you, Carly. So we had a question come in through Facebook, I believe, and they say the mixture of artistic traditions in your work, watercolor and beadwork, is visually very compelling and makes the work unique. Do you find the beadwork influences the watercolors, or the watercolors your beadwork, or both?
So it's such an interplay that happens when I create a piece. So usually I'll start with a photograph and the actual picking and processing the medicines on the land, and then a sketch. Usually if I'm out camping, I'll sketch out the landscape and then later take the photograph to paint it. And then I'll get excited about wanting to paint or to bead one of the medicines or plants on there. So I'll start beading the pussy willow or the wild asparagus, and then I'll go back in and say, oh, it needs more watercolor, and then I'll start adding ink, and then I'll go back to beading. So it's kind of this push play And every time I think it's done, there's usually about 8 more layers to it before it actually feels somewhat done. So it's definitely a process of them interplaying with each other. And I also wanted to mention the Vancouver Island School of Arts. They're Tracy Nielsen and Wendy Welch, 2 of my instructors, really taught me the importance of playing and exploration in it. So I always have maybe a subtle idea of what I want to create, or a feeling or a mood that I want to project, and have a 1 or 2 plants thought about wanting to be on there, but it really becomes an exploration of the mediums and the emotions at that time.
That's great. And how does color play a role in all of that? Because there seems to be, you have a very distinct palette across your work. So I'm wondering how you've developed that.
I think it's just become almost like muscle memory, the colors I use. I have the same really muddy watercolor palette that I mix on that I never clean, and I feel like I just grab for very similar colors, and I'm always mixing the same colors, even if I try to pick something else. And it's really that those blues from the water, that really like beautiful green that you can see in the water, and the plants that kind of dictate and decide what I'm going to do. And then also one of my mentors, Lynette LaFontaine, she taught me how to bead. Hi, Lynette. I meant to mention you earlier. And studying those old grandmother pieces, as we call them, and looking at past works and for ideas on what color choices and what designs belong to us as flower beadwork or mischief people is really important to look at. Yeah. And I think is also shows up in my work, especially with the beadwork pieces.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Carly. It's now my pleasure to introduce our final speaker for today, Elliot Whitehill, Kula Sultan, who is a Coast Salish artist and storyteller. Kula Sultan is his Coast Salish name, and Kwayas is his Nuu-chah-nulth name. He comes from the white family of Snuneymuxw and has roots in the rice family of Penelakut. In the Nuu-chah-nulth world, through the Hamilton family of Hupatchatset, and through his mother, Ela Hill, is of mixed Western European descent. His art practice is rooted in celebrating and honoring the teachings he has received from his family and the Coast Salish worldview. He works to share his appreciation of his culture with others and to ensure that the art, stories, and teachings will be there for future generations of Coast Salish peoples. He graduated from Vancouver Island University with a Bachelor of Arts, major in Liberal Studies, and minor in Philosophy in 2018. He works in economic development for Snuneymuxw First Nation as a project coordinator with Petroglyph Development Group, is a published author, and has exhibited as an artist at various venues and has multiple public art installations in Nanaimo. This fall, he will begin studies at Emily Carr University of Art and Design as he pursues a Master of Fine Arts degree. A selection of his digital works are presented in the exhibition, and together they assert presence, acknowledging the intrinsic relationship of Coast Salish creation stories to land and territory, and the interconnectedness of beings that dwell within it. Thanks for sharing with us tonight, Elliot.
Siam. Thank you, Madeline. Siam nut siaya. Antape Kula-Sultan Tanitsanaf Snuneymuxw. Haitsepka Kwanzalipska Kipa Tanakwel. Hello, everyone. My traditional name is Kula Sultan. I'm Elliot Whitehill. I come from the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and I'm so grateful to be here speaking with you all today. Thank you so much to Auntie Geraldine for the welcome, and thank you so much to the Nanaimo Arts Council and Madeline and everybody for all their work and helping put this together. So I'm a Coast Salish artist and storyteller. My work is really rooted in honoring and expressing our stories and our culture and our history, and expressing them in my own way through my perspective and from my experience and my experience of the modern world, particularly. Coast Salish art is really so intrinsically tied to our understanding of our connection to the land and to our connection to the stories and the history. So many of the old pieces that you look at, they aren't just decorations. The spindle whorls, the house posts, this art that was on everything around us. It all was very specific reference to the stories of the family that owned it or the artist who made it. There was very specific references to the history and our connection to the land, where we come from, our origin stories, how we came to be in these places. So these things are, drawing that connection to storytelling into the modern context is something that I really love doing. I'm so inspired by my late great-grandmother, Dr. Ellen White Quillasselwood, who was just a really incredible person. She was a storyteller and an educator and a healer. And, she published books of traditional stories and worked in the school systems. The work that she did and the work that so many of our elders in the Coast Salish world did to make sure that those teachings were there to pass down to future generations. That's the ground that I stand on and the work that I hope to be able to continue with my practice. So there's also been a long history of, misrepresentation and disrespect and frankly erasure of Coast Salish art within our territories. Going back a long time, really even going back to the 1800s. I think Franz Boas was one of the initial anthropologists in the area, and he described Coast Salish art as a sort of primitive style compared to other styles of the Pacific Northwest. And when people think of art from the Pacific Northwest, Indigenous art, generally what comes to mind is form line, and Salish art is very distinct and unique. To give some examples, Salish art really has similar proportion and form to other Northwest Coast styles, but instead of the strong positive and negative space or the ovoid shapes, you see the space filled in, and the space, almost a silhouette really, is populated with what are known as the Salish shapes. So you have the circle, the crescent, and the trigon, which is sort of a shark tooth or, triangular crescent is, I think, the best way to describe it. So it's very distinct. And our artistic tradition was, I almost would call it less of an art form and more of like this, visual storytelling or a visual language, because it was so intrinsically tied to its use within ceremony and ritual and the telling of stories. The art was so meant for its use. The towards which of the art was always very specific and very apparent. And so one of the things that the old people would talk about is how when you're making art, you always have to try to open yourself and be aware of what you're working with and the way that it's going to be used. There's a philosophical principle in the Coast Salish culture called Ait Shqualowin, or I should say Ait Shqualowin in Snuneymuxw in our dialect. Ait Shqualowin means to be of good mind or to be of good being. Ait Shqualowin is a state that you have to maintain, and it's keeping away the negative energy, and it's about opening yourself and connecting with the world around you and connecting with the energy of the world around you. And when you do that, that's when the art will come, and it comes through training yourself and practice and being present, really. I think that's the most important thing, is being present and in the moment. My late great grandma would talk about how when you're working with something, whether you're weaving with cedar bark or wool, or if you're carving, or if you're making something, you talk to that thing that you're making. You talk to it and you ask it to help you. You let it know what's happening. And when you do that, that's when you're forming that connection that will come to exist. And that's when the art will really come. For me, with my art, I work in modern mediums, I think really I do digital art more than anything these days. Even though it's something that's very contemporary and, you know, our ancestors certainly weren't making spindle whorls on iPads, I find that that connection, like it's really like a metaphysical connection. That connection is the most important thing. And whether you're working on an iPad or if you're drawing or painting or carving or doing anything, it's about being present and trying to open yourself and being aware and thoughtful to the art and to the teachings that are informing you. And that's when it'll come. So with that history of Coast Salish art, though, what happened was that because it was seen as less than, people didn't want to see Coast Salish art in public. This led to a really long history of misrepresentation of Salish art and people not really understanding what it was. And, you know, frankly, it nearly went extinct. It wasn't until the 1970s, that's how long it took. It was in the 1970s that a handful of Coast Salish artists took it on and revitalized our art form. You know, Susan Point from Musqueam, Stan Green, Simon Charlie, Charles Elliott, and so many others. They took on that work, and because of them, our art is now flourishing. There's been multiple generations of Coast Salish artists since who are just doing incredible work. And it's all work that continues that traditional practice of who we are as Coast Salish people and telling stories and acknowledging our histories. And you know, these new generations of artists are doing stuff that is affirmative of our experiences and our identities, as complicated as it's been within Canada and the history of colonization here. And we're reclaiming that space and reclaiming our art and reclaiming that connection to the land. You know, I think that one of the things that was so present to me is that, you know, even if we're living in cities and we don't exist on the land in the same way, it's still the land. The energy of the land is still there, and it's sprouting up through the cracks in the pavement in places. And it's just about finding those spots and finding those moments where you can be present and connect. So it's so important, though, I think, that Coast Salish art is represented within our territory because of that history. I'm so grateful to have had the opportunities over the past year or two now where I've been able to share my art in public. I have a couple installations, like one at Bevan Park Swimming Pool. I was commissioned by the city of Nanaimo. And I did an installation that was really rooted in celebrating Snuneymuxw connection to the estuary here. And, you know, making art for the kids that would be at the pool and the people who would visit the pool to see that this rich heritage that Snuneymuxw has and to learn stories about this place. You know, a couple of the stories that I referenced there are like the origin of the dog salmon run on the river here. In Snuneymuxw history, one of our ancestors went and married into the dog salmon people, the Quatloch people. And because of that relationship, that connection to the dog salmon, their love and their generosity to us as family is the reason that the dog salmon run and spawn in our river and feed us and have fed us for thousands and thousands of years. And you know, other stories, like one other story that I referenced was told by my late great grandma about children who transformed into a killer whale, and how there were these group of children who were not being looked after properly by the elders of the community. The elders of community were not educating them and involving them in the teachings in a way that they should have been. And because of this, the children went off on their own and felt that they had to prove themselves. And they ended up transforming into a killer whale, and they couldn't turn back. And because of that, you know, the generation of children was lost. And it talks about the really serious responsibility that we have to look after future generations and to ensure that the education and the teachings are there. And, you know, in that sense, I think that making sure that the art is seen and that our territory is blanketed with our art, and that future generations of Snuneymuxw kids are growing up surrounded by their art. And when they look to the world around them, they see themselves represented and reflected. That's a critical part of that work in continuing those teachings. And it just makes me so happy to see the incredible work that other artists from not just the Coast Salish people, but everywhere are doing. You know, I'm really present to me with this whole exhibit is the aspect of digital art. And I was talking a little bit about sort of modern media, but I think that connection across, you know, digital landscapes can be so powerful. Like for me, I started sharing my art on social media about a year ago or 2 years ago. And since then, I've just felt like I've become part of this community of artists in Canada, Indigenous artists. And it's really opened my eyes to such a, you know, really, I think it's a renaissance of Indigenous art that's taking place. And it's just so powerful to see. And it's this connection everyone is sharing with each other and celebrating each other. And it's a connection that couldn't take place without that digital aspect. So I think that, you know, having this gallery online for everybody to be able to see and to share it with such a broad audience is a very powerful thing. And I'm so grateful for that. Yeah, and just so that's a bit about my practice. And, you know, I think just continuing to tell the stories and see where the art will take me is really important to me. And it's something that I cherish. And I'm really honored to have the opportunity to do. So Haitsepka CM again, just thank you all so much for being here and taking the time to watch this all. And thank you so much to the other artists participating in the Nanaimo Arts Council. CM.
Thank you so much, Elliot. I love the idea you're talking about of taking up space and reclaiming space, because art is so physical. Even digital art, it literally takes up space. So to use art as a conduit or a bit sort of push and pull between stories to reclaim space is incredibly powerful. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think that leads us into our first question, which we received through Instagram, which is, what are some ideal ways you want your work to be displayed and viewed?
Yeah, I think that, you know, for me with my practice as it is now, I think that sharing it in all of the places I can is really important. You know, really it's about recontextualizing space in Nanaimo as Nanaimo and bringing these teachings and our art back to the surface and making sure that representation takes place. You know, public art has just enormous transformative potential with the way that, you know, it frames space and it frames the narratives that occur within that space. And even if it's something as simple as somebody, you know, just walking by a mural each day, that becomes a part of their life in a sense, you know. And there are other things that I've done, like I think in October of 2018, we launched a collaboration that I did with Nanaimo Supply Co. and Corey Landels, who's a local business owner. We did a line of t-shirts and, you know, clothes that had one of my block print designs on it that said Snuneymuxw. And in a sense, that's also a public art installation too. You know, it becomes this thing that people interact with. And, you know, it celebrates Snuneymuxw, you know, so explicitly, I think, in a way that hasn't been done too much in the community here. So I'm so proud to be part of that. And, you know, as a fundraising project too. And yeah, just, you know, bringing that back to the surface and celebrating it.
Thank you so much. Another question we received was, do all of your images stem from stories, or do some of your stories arise from the images you create?
Yeah, it's a little bit all over the place, frankly. You know, I'm so inspired by the work that my great grandma did and the stories that she left. And I'm always so inspired when I'm reading our traditional stories. You know, my art journey really began when my great grandma passed away, and I realized that I have to do more to be able to continue that work. And so I started researching Coast Salish culture and you know, reading all the anthropological texts and all the documents and everything. The art really surged from that. It sprung from that. And so my inspiration is both within, as I continue to learn more about the Coast Salish people and who we are and our history. And, you know, especially the language, the Hulkaminam language. I'm always inspired by the ways that the ancestors saw the world, which is contained within our language. So I feel inspired when I learn more words and I'm learning about the ways that things are understood. I'm really inspired by my interactions with the people around me, and, you know, having conversations, or, you know, some of my works are made specifically because I know certain people will like them. And you know, just being present and thinking about, you know, what's trying to be shown to me right now, and yeah, just drawing inspiration. And I think that it becomes that back and forth, because I like the spontaneity of, you know, I'll have a concept, but then I'll sit down and actually try to figure out, how can I make this, and it ends up being totally different than what I might have thought. And just embracing that spontaneity and the you know, that moment, and celebrating that.
Nice, great. I'm wondering if you can explain, you kind of hinted at it with the iPad drop, but can you tell us a little bit about your technique in producing the digital works, and, you know, how they transpire, basically?
Yeah, so I do most of my work in Procreate. You know, really, when I got an iPad, I think in the December of 2019, it hasn't been too long, but when I got that iPad, it just opened up so many doorways for me when it came to my art practice. Like, prior to that, I was primarily working in block printing, and you know, some like sketching and illustrating. And if I wanted to complete an artwork, I would have to, you know, put it down, the design, transfer it to a block, carve the block, and then print it. And usually it would be one color. And so when I got the iPad, I could start doing designs that were like so many different colors, and, you know, so there's so many features on Procreate too that are fun to use. So that just opened up so many pathways for me. And like, I really find that there's something about just that fluidity of lines, and just trying to capture something that is of this moment, you know, that became a big part of my practice. And just, you know, the simple colors, and really drawing inspiration, I think, from the traditional form. I looked at, you know, like exclusively Coast Salish art for such a long time before I started making it. And I'm always looking at the old like collections and museums, and looking at the old pieces for inspiration.
Thank you so much, Elliot. And thank you to all of the artists for participating in the talk today and the exhibition. Please go check out the exhibition and learn as much as you can about all of their works. They all have really special and incredible things to say about their own work. So click on every artwork and learn some more. And with that, I'll invite Sean up to give some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Well, those were great talks tonight. They were all so interesting and inspiring. And I think altogether, this was a very auspicious beginning to our program of curated exhibitions. There's nothing left for me to do but to say thank you to everyone who attended today, with very special thanks to Geraldine Manson, to our artists Marianne Mulkan, Carlena Bess, and Elliot Whitehill, and to our curator, Madeline Claire Benson. Our thanks also go to Miles Hayes at the Zoom controls, our web developer, Jean-Di Cran, and to our board of directors and other volunteers who gave their time to this project. Special mention is due to the Coastal Community Credit Union, who gave us a grant in 2020 towards creating our online galleries. And tonight's exhibition marks the full realization of that project. We'd also like to express our appreciation to our core funders, the City of Nanaimo and the British Columbia Arts Council, and to the other businesses and individuals in Nanaimo who donate to support our programming. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and thank you again for supporting and participating art in the Nanaimo region.